Hello, my name is Lori Thomas, and I'm the Interim Director of UNC Charlotte's Urban Institute, where I also serve as the Executive Director of the Institute for Social Capital. It's my pleasure to welcome you to the fourth in a five-part series of virtual conversations leading up to our annual event on November 18th, the Schul Forum. The theme of this year's forum is economic mobility, which remains ever timely in our community since it first became a part of our civic agenda in 2015. The UNC Charlotte Urban Institute has been a part of a community-wide effort to better understand the challenges we face in improving upward economic mobility. Our role has been that of a research partner, not only looking at the historical conditions that led to our community's poor ranking, but also at some of the policy solutions that might be the key to building a more equitable and promising future. We are excited to dig deeper into issues and policy solutions through this year's Schul Forum. The forum was established in 2019 with an endowed gift from two longtime supporters of the university, alumnus Marianne Schul and her husband Norm, who served as the Urban Institute's founding director in 1969, over 50 years ago. The Schuls have long believed in the Institute's power to bring the Charlotte region together in dialogue around important community issues, especially when that dialogue is informed by research taking place here at UNC Charlotte, which brings us to our second sponsor of these Schul conversations. In 2019, the Gambrell Foundation made a multi-year commitment to support research at the Urban Institute focused on the issue of economic mobility. An important component of that research is the Gambrell Faculty Fellows, a program that funds faculty who are committed to exploring more deeply how issues within their respective fields might further our understanding of economic mobility. Our final Schul conversation will be on October 28th and will focus on workforce development, featuring Janet Labar from Charlotte Regional Business Alliance, Dr. Fallon Wilson from Black Tech Futures and Columbia University in New York, and Gambrell Faculty Fellow and Faculty Member in Social Work, Dr. Tianka Crocker. Please see the registration information for that conversation in the chat, and we hope you'll join us. These five conversations have been leading us to the Schul Forum that will feature a panel discussion on where we are now, 7 years after Raj Chetty and colleagues published their rankings on economic mobility, as well as a discussion on how we move the needle on economic mobility, particularly in light of the pandemic. I am very pleased to share that our featured speaker for that event will be Dr. Andre Perry of the Brookings Institution. Dr. Perry is most recently the author of Know Your Price, Valuing Black Lives and Properties in America's Black Cities. Dr. Perry will challenge our framing of economic mobility, both how we understand the problem and how we work to solve it. See the save the date information in the chat and stay tuned for registration information, including whether this event will be in person or virtual. And on that note, we'd like your feedback. We're dropping a one-question survey in the chat to ask your preference for an in-person or a virtual event. Thank you so much for your input. But let's get to today's Schul conversation about wealth, the racial wealth gap, and economic mobility. Much of our local conversation about economic mobility has centered around improving income mobility or the ability of children to earn more than their parents when they become adults. But as important, or perhaps even more so, is a focus on wealth. Wealth is a more multifaceted economic measure that includes income as well as the value of other assets, including a home, a business, a variety of investments, and inherited assets. It's often this generational wealth that provides a springboard for subsequent generations to engage in wealth building activities and engage in them much earlier than those without access to wealth. Wealth cushions families in times of need like a pandemic, a recession, job loss, and illness. It is passed down from one generation to another. Put simply, families with wealth, not just an income, are families that can weather storms and build generational success. And in our country, wealth is a product of historical policy decisions that have created an extensive racial wealth gap. To introduce our guest and help us dig into the racial wealth gap and economic mobility, it's my pleasure to introduce you to our moderator for today's panel, Dr. Byron White. Dr. White is the Associate Provost of the Office of Urban Research and Community Engagement, Charlotte Urban Institute's parent academic unit. He joined us at Charlotte last year and brings a range of experiences from leading a public-private collaborative at the Strive Partnership in Cincinnati to serving as Vice President of University Engagement and Chief Diversity Officer at Cleveland State University, Vice Chancellor for Economic Advancement at the Ohio Department of Higher Education, and Associate Vice President for Community Engagement at Xavier University, all following a career at the Chicago Tribune. Byron, I now turn it over to you to introduce our panelists and lead this shul conversation. Thank you.
Thank you, Lori. Good afternoon to everyone. I'm pleased to be here and feel particularly honored to facilitate this important conversation with this esteemed panel. I do want to note at the beginning that I am juggling a couple screens so that I can stay in touch with comments and questions that may come in during the session. So if you see me glance over, it's not because I'm not paying attention. As Lori noted, though, just to set up the conversation, while economic mobility can be understood in terms of income, wealth can be a far more powerful lens to understand both the problems of economic mobility and meaningful solutions. When families have access to wealth beyond their immediate income, they can purchase homes and businesses, pay for college, care for their very young and very old in their families, and weather emergencies like the pandemic. If you can't accumulate wealth beyond your immediate income, no matter how that income is, you're effectively living paycheck to paycheck. So opportunities and protections offered by wealth are not universally available. However, the median net worth of white households is greater than any other group, 10 times that of Black families, 8 times that of Latinx families. Economic events like the Great Recession and our recent pandemic related economic crises have long-lasting implications for Black and Latinx families. From the Urban Institute's Racial Equity Gap Report, we know that the Great Recession from 2007 to 2010 negatively impacted the net worth of all households. Immediately after the recession, however, from 2010 to 2013, white households were able to begin recovery sooner. Overall, white households lost 13.9% of their wealth between 2010 and 2016, while Black households lost 29.5% of their wealth in the same period, further widening the wealth gap. In addition to disproportionate health impacts, we know already that Black and Latinx families experience higher unemployment and more frequently reporting having to dip into savings and retirement to weather the pandemic. These aren't preordained outcomes or the product of some kind of natural laws. They are, in fact, policy outcomes determined by policies we've put in place. And that means we have the power to change those outcomes. So let's talk to 3 people now who have studied and are working effectively to close that gap. Dr. Derek Hamilton is the Henry Cohen Professor of Economics and Urban Policy and the founding director of the Institute for the Study of Race Stratification and Political Economy at the New School in New York City. Keith Cockrell is president of Bank of America, Charlotte. And Angelique Gaines is research associate for the UNC Charlotte Urban Institute. I'd like to ask each of you to share a little bit about yourself and what brings you to this work of addressing the racial wealth gap and economic mobility. Dr. Hamilton, would you start, please?
Sure, and let me start by saying thank you. Thank you for hosting this event. There perhaps is no important question bigger than this than thinking about the ways in which people can achieve their best self and trying to forge a society where somebody's race has no transactional value, particularly in a domain like wealth. And you know, that preamble is pretty much the type of work that I do. I am an economist that's engaged in trying to literally change political economy to promote a moral economy, a society that works for people to achieve their self-determined goal and have the power to achieve that goal. So as an economist, I don't look at questions like race, gender, and other forms of identity stratification as periphery, but I recognize that our economy is linked in ways that politics, economics, and unfortunately, things like race, gender, disability status, they are iteratively related and can't be thought of in isolation, but rather in this iteration, work in a way that allows us to talk about poor people in terms that are racialized as somehow undeserving, demeaned, deficient, as opposed to really understanding that poverty is linked to lack of resources.
Very good. Now, thank you for that introduction and for starting the conversation, really. Mr. Cockrell, would you introduce yourself?
My pleasure. It's also a pleasure to join you today. I'm Kieth Cockrell, President of Bank of America, Charlotte. And here at Bank of America, we've tried to demonstrate real leadership in this area and what business can do to really help eradicate some of the challenges that we've had regarding racial equality and economic opportunity. We announced a $1.25 billion initiative over the course of 5 years, specifically focused on key areas that we believe can create or inhibit the ability for real wealth creation. And that's in the area of home ownership, small business ownership, jobs and careers and providing opportunities and job training. And as we all have witnessed over the last 19, 20 months, the impact of healthcare. And so we've been engaged in a number of initiatives here locally in support of these 4 pillars. And I might also add that we've been a strong proponent of education, the role that education continues and will continue to provide. So it's everything from a commitment to, if you work for Bank of America, we believe that you should have a means to provide for a family of 4. And so we recently announced $21 per hour as a minimum pay, starting pay for every employee at Bank of America, with a commitment by 2025 to be at $25 an hour. As I mentioned, we can't solve every problem on our own, but we really do believe that here in Charlotte, as well as nationally, we can demonstrate true leadership in how do we provide and correct the ills of the past regarding allowing Blacks, Hispanics, and Asian Americans the ability to live that dream of home ownership. We've invested in entrepreneur education and specifically Black innovation with our Center of Black Entrepreneurship. We've provided over $200 million to 100 private funds that are specifically focused on investing in Black and brown businesses to help them not only sustain, but grow and provide opportunities. That creates opportunity not only for those private fund managers, but also for the business owners and the employees that they employ. So I look forward to engaging in this very necessary discussion regarding how do we create wealth in these communities that have previously been denied opportunity.
Very good. Thank you. Appreciate those comments, and we're eager to hear more about some of those strategies that you're pursuing at Bank of America. And Ms. Gaines, would you introduce yourself?
Yes, I am a research associate at UNC Charlotte's Urban Institute, and I'm happy to be a part of this conversation today. As a researcher, I believe research can advance social change. Research not only underscores inequities, but it encourages effective and timely decision-making. Over the past 2 years, I had the honor of being engaged in both the Charlotte-Mecklenburg Racial Wealth Gap and the Minority-Owned Small Business Research Projects here at the Institute. The Racial Wealth Gap report was released in the fall of 2019 and examines the disparities related to race and wealth in Charlotte, as well as highlights potential solutions. I believe this research uses wealth as a lens to understand economic mobility, which broadens the conversations we've been having in Charlotte, which has focused mainly on income. And then the Minority-Owned Small Business Report was released in the summer of 2021 and builds off the previous research. This study explores business ownership as a pathway to wealth and a way to advance economic opportunity for communities of color. This research allowed us to better understand the landscape of minority-owned small businesses and the infrastructure needed to support them here in Charlotte-Mecklenburg. I look forward to sharing more about these findings.
Thank you. Appreciate that. And we should acknowledge that Bank of America provided support to that racial wealth gap report and leadership on the minority-owned small business report as well. So it's been a true collaboration. I'm going to get started with questions. I do want to just remind our audience, please engage with us. If you have a question, put it in chat. And what we'll do is we'll capture that and try to insert those questions as we go along through the conversation. Also, just to make this a little more efficient, I'm going to use first names if everyone's okay with that moving forward. So we're all family here, right? So we can do that. So Derek, let me start with you. In your work, you frame often this issue as in terms of looking at causes, consequences, and remedies regarding the issue of wealth and economic mobility. Can you really start us off by telling us some of the historical causes you've explored in your research, including the role of politics and government?
Thank you for that. And you know, the framing of causes, consequences, and remedies is purposeful because one, wealth serves as both an input and an output. And we often negate the input side, that the essence of wealth is what it can do for you. And then here's the point about remedies. Remedies is that this current structure is not inevitable. There are things we can do to change the structure. And in fact, that answers your question. We've had a history in which government interactions and government engagement have facilitated the wealth accumulation of one population and not the other. So a white asset-based class didn't simply emerge. It was rather government policies like FHA loans, policies like the Homestead Act, where government provided the capital by which a population could begin to accumulate wealth. And that kind of makes the point that it takes wealth to build wealth. And if a population doesn't have wealth, then they simply can't grow wealth en masse, that it's government actions. And then here's the other point. By both design and implementation, Blacks have historically been denied access to that political power. So for example, if we look at what's a policy in history, if we look at the GI Bill, which pretty much facilitated a professional class of whites to go to college, GIs coming home from World War II, facially, that was a race neutral policy. But if you allow for the implementation of that GI Bill at local levels in a Jim Crow Southern context, or frankly, even beyond the South, a context of hostility, then you can imagine by implementation how some populations can be denied. So, you know, a key point is that when we started, Black people began as an enslaved population when they served as literal chattel capital assets for a white landowning plantation class. And then after that history, we've had government actions that have facilitated the capital for one group, but not the other. But then here's another point. Not only were they denied the capital throughout history, but when Blacks were able to amass capital, they never had the political protections en masse to protect that capital. So this year marks, for instance, the 100th anniversary of the Tulsa Massacre, the Tulsa Race Massacre. At the time, Tulsa was known back in 1919 as the Black Wall Street. You know, I'm going to reject that name slightly, and only because the diversity of commodities that took place in that community went well beyond finance, that community was thriving in multiple dimensions, or at least relatively thriving in multiple dimensions. But yet that property that had amassed was vulnerable to terrorist acts, and government was complicit in it. So that is one of many examples. There were lots of lynchings that took place. There were lots of political violence aimed at literally taking and terrorizing the wealth that had been amassed. So, ultimately, the biggest indicator of our racist past that we have is the racial wealth gap. And the racial wealth gap is the result of a past that has left one community vulnerable as it relates to individual transactions because government didn't protect them, and in fact used violence to impose things like the property rights of whiteness, as well as a policy infrastructure that by design and implementation facilitated one group at the expense of another.
Yeah, as you talk about the both the implications of policy on discrimination against Blacks, but then the lack of protection that has come from that. Angelique, I'm just wondering, in terms of the local consequences, the ramifications of those policies here in Charlotte, what has your research with the Urban Institute shown?
Thank you, Byron. When simply defined, wealth is the net amount of assets minus any debt or liabilities. But the research team has found that wealth functions in more complex ways. So we found that wealth is multifaceted. There are multiple pathways to asset development. Wealth does not encompass income alone. It also includes value from education, business ownership, home ownership, which has been mentioned, retirement, and other investments. Families with access to these diverse assets beyond their income are able to afford more opportunities. But when we look at wealth, key economic indicators demonstrate persistent racial and ethnic disparities. As Dr. Hamilton mentioned, wealth is also structural. Each of these asset paths are marked by historical policies and practices, which have allowed some groups to accumulate wealth while excluding others from doing so. And we found that wealth is cumulative in nature as well. It develops over time and is passed down from generation to generation. So some children or grandchildren may inherit homes, businesses, and other assets from their parents or grandparents. So what does these disparities look like nationally and locally? So nationally, the median wealth of white households is 10 times that of Black households and 8 times that of Latinx households. Zero or negative net worth is also gives us a snapshot of wealth. Negative net worth occurs when total debts exceed the total assets. In Charlotte, nearly 1 in 3 Black households have zero or negative net worth, while 1 in 7 white and Asian households have zero or negative net worth. Asset poverty is another way to understand where wealth is absent. Asset poverty is the lack of sufficient savings or assets that can be used to pay for basic needs for about 3 months without income. In Charlotte, households of color are more than twice as likely to experience asset poverty as white households. So the impact of crises further widens the racial wealth gap. Crises such as the pandemic leading to greater inequity and limited safety nets when another crisis occurs.
Yeah, as I was listening to you talk about the cumulative impact of wealth, Kieth, I was thinking, this is your professional career in the financial sector. That aspect of wealth creation has been, core to obviously your career, and you've witnessed the sector's historic role regarding these policies and actions and contribution to the racial wealth gap. I know you talked in your introduction about some of the things you're addressing as a bank executive to remedy that, or at least to address it. But can you reflect a little bit through your personal experience and career on past practices that you're seeking to overcome?
Well, thank you, Byron. One of the things that immediately stays present for me is, as a child, although my parents, grandparents had a relationship with a financial institution, when I got my first job, I did what everybody in my neighborhood did, and that was I looked for a ride to the check cashing facility. And I literally paid someone to cash my check for a year. And as sad as it may be, the fact of the matter, and it still fuels me to this very day, I could go back to my hometown neighborhood on Long Island and still find people who look like me who are still paying someone to cash their check, their hard-earned dollars. And in addition, I would say that my grandparents, although they had credit all over town, they couldn't teach me what a FICO score was because they didn't have formal credit until very, very late in life as homeowners and the like. And so education and financial education specifically plays a very, very significant role that we still have to fight and be proximate with our neighborhoods. And so here at Bank of America, if I fast forward to today, we provide up to $17,500 available for the purchase of a new home if it's in a low-income neighborhood or an area that is worthy of reinvestment. We're proud of that. We believe that that's the richest grant program available in the market today, but it means nothing if the folks here on the west side of Charlotte or on the northeast side aren't aware of the program, don't even know that they can own a home and how to go about owning a home. So education and financial education specifically plays a very, very important role. And I'm never that far removed. It fuels me today and why we're so passionate about this work. But we recognize that we alone at Bank of America may not be able to solve all the issues, but if we can exhibit leadership, and we all know the value of work. And so we've provided 21 higher educational schools like CPCC here locally, $1 million to create opportunities for career paths, job paths, to educate folks on, not every role in Bank of America. We've done a lot of work to ensure that a 4-year degree is not a core requirement that eliminates people from having an opportunity to even come join us. And so it's a multi-pronged challenge that we have in front of us, but we're hopeful that we can convince this collaboration between public and private coalitions to come together to really address these substantive issues that we're faced with today in the Black and African American, Hispanic, Latino, and as well as the growing Asian population that we have here in Charlotte.
Angelique, I'm just kind of building on this emphasis that Kieth is talking about, that's he's seeing in his industry and certainly Bank of America. This discussion of wealth is a bit different than the focus on income, which I think had taken hold for many years in many communities, including Charlotte. Are you seeing that we're reshaping this conversation to think more about wealth as we address these huge economic racial disparities that have been exposed to the Chetty research and others? Is the conversation shifting?
I believe it has. As I mentioned, opening up the conversation beyond just income has allowed Charlotte to assess accessibility to other asset pathways, including business ownership, including home ownership and other asset pathways. We examined business ownership through our study of minority-owned small businesses in Charlotte-Mecklenburg, and we found that minority-owned small businesses still face unique barriers that limit their ability to start and sustain. So just building a more equitable and a more supportive infrastructure for them to thrive is key.
Yeah. So Kieth, let me come back to you then. Given that shift in the conversation that Angelique's talking about, what's been the incentive for your industry, for Bank of America, to really take this on? I know that you see financial institutions can play a key role in addressing this issue. Why now, and in what ways differently than maybe in the past?
I hope that many in my industry believe that healthy communities lead to good business opportunities. And we have the good fortune of being here in Charlotte, Mecklenburg County, and North Carolina, which is a growth community that's growing rapidly. So the opportunity is there for us to continue to allow more people to participate. And so specifically, as Angelique mentioned, we have to be informed by the past, but also understand the needs of what these small business owners need. Frequently, as an example, we may hear from business owners, specifically business owners of color, that say that, hey, I need access to capital. Well, I'm in the business of providing loans to businesses and consumers. I want to provide good loans. But as I mentioned, if you didn't have the education in terms of how a bank may view credit, then it may be very difficult for me to provide, because I'm not in the business of taking losses. Yes, it's an outcome of some of the business that we do, but obviously I want to provide loans that are going to be repaid. So these partnerships that we've established with UNC Charlotte and other educational programs and churches to be proximate with business owners and with consumers to help them understand and further educate them. So it's everything from better money habits education that we can provide to students, because we recognize in primary education, we haven't historically taught financial management and wealth creation. So we have to start right at the root and help children understand that, yes, here's how you manage money. And you can save for today, even with the allowance that you have, that you don't have to spend everything. And to help parents realize that as tough as it may be right now to pay your rent, you can still dream about owning a home. And here's the value of owning a home, and then still saving for college education, perhaps for your child. So that's the role that I believe we and all of us in the industry must play to further educate folks on how they can fully participate and stop paying all these fees to fix your credit quickly or to cash a check.
So, Derek, as I am listening to the strategies and the incentives, I love the idea that the doing this work is being seen as what is good business. Essentially, it's just at the core of the work that you mentioned, Kieth. Derek, I know that you see those corporate strategies as meaningful and essential, but not enough. And that governmental intervention is necessary alongside this work. And I wonder if you can speak to some of that foundational role and speak to it in light of a question that Reverend Willard Bass has posed, which basically he's just asking fundamentally, there's been this expansive growth in business wealth. So why is there still such poverty in communities of color? So what role is this foundational role for government in really getting to solutions, remedies such as baby bonds and other things you've talked about?
So I'll lead with the answer to your question, which is poverty is a political choice, and we can make a different choice. I mean, the most direct and parsimonious way to eliminate poverty is literally to eliminate poverty. Right now, something that's gaining vogue is guaranteed income. So literally, if we decided as a society we didn't want the blight of poverty, we have the capacities, we don't have the political will where we could literally eliminate it. And I know I'm simplifying it, but it's important to simplify things to put it in context. I just want to make a couple of statements about some of the conversation that's already transpired by first saying we should certainly give homage and shout outs to some, I'll use intellectual OGs of like Michael Sheridan with his book Assets and the Poor, which started to shift the conversation from income to assets as far back as early to mid 1990s. And Melvin Oliver and Tom Shapiro in their seminal book, Black Wealth, White Wealth, where they were ahead of the game. They were sociologists talking about wealth in ways that my discipline, economics, was still myopically focused on income. But here's the point of citing that old literature. It was social movements that got us to this place where it's now part of our national lexicon. So I'm sure there's some people out in the audience who, through their advocacy and et cetera, have really changed the conversation to where we are now. But that intellectual foundation has been there and is continuing to grow. And then let me also acknowledge and with sincere gratitude that Bank of America is a supporter of the institute that I direct, Institute on Race and Political Economy at the New School. And I also want to applaud Bank of America in their approach to be good citizens. I mean, that the initiative that Kieth mentioned, where every employee earns at least $21 and it's going to raise to $25, that sets a demonstration for society of what can be done. And I respect and appreciate that. Let me say also that the issue of financial literacy, financial knowledge, regardless of race, regardless of class, people desire, and here's a word I would use and encourage us to use, financial coaching. That's a privilege and a benefit, that information is asymmetric, regardless of our class and our race. And there are people in the finance industry that are specialized with certain information, and the extent to which we can provide financial coaching to people, a privilege, especially to those that don't have political or economic access to that, that's all good. But I like that framing because it puts the onus on where it should be, not the people per se, but on the structures that allow them access to that asset. And then, again, I'll say that it is useful in modeling behavior for corporations. And again, no shade at all, appreciate the leadership of Bank of America to demonstrate what good workplace products can be and the ways in which they engage with their workers, as well as what good consumer products can be in the ways in which they add a moral ethic, even independent of the business initiative, to developing products that can be used in the workplace. That's good citizenry. That's good behavior and what we need in our society. But here's the point, and I'm sorry I'm long-winded. It becomes really useful to recognize that at the end of the day, for this to be scalable, these demonstrations demonstrate what we can do and what government can do. But for it to be scalable, we need only look at history and show that throughout history, it has always been the case that it was government interventions that moved the population to have things like wealth en masse. So that's the point. The point is that the corporations have a great role and an important role, one, in just being good citizens, and then two, in serving as demonstrations of innovation that government can take up and should take up to move society forward. But on scale, that's where it has to come from.
And Byron, if I can just add.
Yes, absolutely, Keith.
I applaud what Derek, thank you for the recognition, Derek, but I applaud what he's really sharing, because we're unique here in some respect in Charlotte. So when I talk about these public-private coalitions that we're trying to establish here, I'll just give one example. We provided laptops, 10,000 Chromebooks to families who we knew, because of the COVID crisis that we had last year, didn't have access to intelligent devices and the internet for remote learning. This community came together to provide funding so those students could still participate in school remotely last year. But at the end of the school year, they had to return that equipment. So they went all summer with nothing. And so that's not only the normal summer slide of education that we were going to experience, those were also adults in that household who had no access. At Bank of America, like I mentioned, we're proud of our $21 an hour minimum pay, but you can't even apply for one of those $21 an hour jobs unless you have access to the internet. We don't accept paper applications. So that's where we stepped forward and we said, hey, we need a permanent solution for these families, and donated 10,000 workstations. But that's the easy part. But we also gave 10,000 hours to mentor and tutor not only the students in those households, but hopefully to further educate the adults in those households for career opportunity as well as educational opportunity. And those are the things that we started to do, but we had a partnership. The city came with us on this. The healthcare industry came with us. So when we were distributing the Chromebooks, we also got vaccinations in people's arms. And so that's the role that we can all play in building. I think here in Charlotte, as an example, we've got the opportunity to be the first major city to eradicate this digital divide, to eradicate it. I'm not trying to say that education is the sole answer for wealth creation, but it does play a very important role. And we all are recognizing that the interconnectedness of business ownership, home ownership, healthcare, and the disparities that have plagued our communities for far so long. And we got a wonderful mayor who's demonstrating great leadership, rallying the business community, and leveraging public servants to really play a significant role in hopefully having a sustainable solution for the long term.
Keith, since you've mentioned education, thank you for jumping in there, but I'm just going to run a question by you that Julie Stedman posed about financial literacy. You've talked about that as an important piece, and she mentions that she's taught financial literacy in a Title I high school, but she wonders why that material isn't incorporated into school curriculum, and I wonder if that's something you would be a proponent of, or it might even be something that Bank of America is working on.
Well, we're strong supporters of it, and in some schools it is. We have volunteers at Bank of America that religiously provide what we call Better Money Habits, tutoring and educational coaching, as Derek mentioned, available to, we may be in churches, we may be in community centers and things of that nature. But the one thing that I'd like everybody to take away is that bettermoneyhabits.com is available. You can go on the Bank of America website. It's available for every household. So you don't have to wait for it to be embedded in every school. You can bring it into your household. There are small vignettes that you can expose your children to. And it's a series on home ownership or establishing credit or saving for tomorrow. These are all readily available today. And I'd like everyone to take advantage of that and invest in your own child, in your own household, by just leveraging the video series that's available.
Very good. Angelique, did you want to?
Yeah, so I know we're talking about remedies and solutions. And I wanted to just reiterate that the racial wealth gap stems from the impact of inequity across multiple pathways, as we mentioned throughout this discussion. And to address the racial wealth gap in Charlotte-Mecklenburg, we will need to change the structures that have hindered access to these asset pathways. So through that minority-owned small business study that we conducted, we found that in order to build a more equitable infrastructure, coordinating the efforts of all sectors, including public, including the private sector and nonprofit sectors, and providing that support from startup through maturity is key. And some of the strategies that we touched on in the report included supporting minority-owned small businesses, expanding access to capital through loans, grants, and venture capital, increasing access to profitable product markets through well-designed procurement programs, and providing a continuum of support that incorporates mentorship, coaching that Dr. Hamilton mentioned, and formal networking opportunities, among other strategies.
I want to go back to Keith on the small business efforts, but one question that came in early, Derek, and going back to you when you were talking about government strategies, Susan Harden asked a question about local and state government policies around corporate tax incentives that are part of economic strategies to lure businesses and support businesses. And she's wondering if those incentives have any impact on this issue of wealth, and particularly wealth disparities, racial disparities.
I love that question. I'm going to say that one particular place where public-private partnerships can work are, the things that Keith mentioned, like Bank of America can have a good impact in partnership with Charlotte at the local level, because the reality is that local budgets are constrained in ways that the federal government budgets aren't. But this fits in with the realm of demonstration, because at the end of the day, we don't want this to be one-off. We want this to be sustainable and almost a right. We would desire for all children to have a right to a computer, that this is not something like access to a computer that is essential to be able to even apply to a job, is an enabling good that Without it, you simply don't have access. So we want a society that provides some economic rights, at least in my frame, so that people can be their best self. And Bank of America, in partnership with Charlotte at the local level, can set that demonstration. But here's the point. At the end of the day, the capacity to commodify, to institute this as a right, to codify this as a right, has to come from the federal government. And if we think anything otherwise, then we're at the whim of charity. That just like this decision was made with goodwill in this time, tomorrow a different decision can make. And I don't think we want that vulnerability in society. But to answer the question, government stimulus grows economies. And there's several ways in which we can stimulate an economy. One is by trying to direct resources toward a corporate infrastructure that can have a multiplier effect that hopefully raises up the level of productivity for the whole society. Another way is directly to people, to stimulate human beings, to provide capital directly to people, which will have a direct effect on their well-being, but also generate a panoply of activity that can have a multiplying effect also. So I know I'm in the cloud, and I know that the reality is that it might happen somewhere in between, but the preponderance of the ways in which government has engaged in our last 50 years has been, in my view, almost myopically associated with stimulating the corporate sector and not paying as much attention to the labor sector that I've described. And I dare say that there's a potential for an even greater multiplier effect if we focus more on the local level. Now, I apologize for being long-winded, but in the context of a place like Charlotte, North Carolina, that might be competing with other localities like Atlanta or New York City or somewhere else, unfortunately, without us having the structures in place to make sure that people are solidified, localities get caught up in these competitions to try to lure in capital in ways that very well could divert resources from their residents. And again, this is more complicated than I described, but I think these are some of the issues that we grapple with.
Keith, I wanted to give you a chance to comment just a bit on what Angelique raised in terms of businesses and particularly minority-owned businesses, and that you've been talking about efforts really more individually based, and I wonder what the strategy is there around small business and racial disparities there.
Yeah, so in partnership with Angelique, we're most appreciative of the research that was provided to really help us better understand where the gaps are and where the opportunities are and what more we need to play. We'll do more with minority-owned small businesses, not because we have more money, but hopefully we'll demonstrate to minority-owned small businesses that nobody's going to care for them more than we do here at Bank of America and exhibit some leadership. So how do you do that? So the first thing was to be fact-based in terms of truly understanding, not just from our clients, but one of the things that this study provided was, these were small businesses that weren't associated with Bank of America. It gave us insight to what are they thinking. In some cases, my brand may resonate and they may want to do more business with Bank or do business with Bank of America. In other cases, for whatever reason, they may not choose to look to Bank of America first for their opportunity for growth or sustainability. And that's okay. But what we learned were some of the things that we already know, and that in these communities, we have to do more to establish a trusting relationship. So in the Hispanic Latino community, that may manifest itself in terms of having more Spanish speakers available who can demonstrate a willingness to help educate and provide coaching and direction for Hispanic Latino businesses. One of the outgrowths of the study that was performed here was to say that, okay, we want to lean in. So let's establish councils. So we now have a Black African American Business Council, and we have a separate Hispanic Latino Business Council. And we've asked them to do a few things with us. One, help us understand more what is really required to support your business. And these are businesses that are in multiple stages of everything from relatively new business to well-established businesses, very mature. Secondly, we asked them to provide direct feedback to us in terms of our product and service offerings. And then thirdly, advocate for us in the communities, help us understand where else we need to show up, where we may not be showing up. And so we're very excited about the councils that we've established, and there's just so much more work that needs to be done, but we can say that we're just not giving money. With all due respect, I'm not trying to poo-poo $1.25 billion, but to be quite honest with you, that's the easy thing to do. What's much more difficult is to be on the ground, elbow to elbow, shoulder to shoulder with consumers, with small business owners, and saying that, hey, we want something better than what we've delivered in the past, regardless of how you think of us in the industry. And what more do we need to do to be proximate and truly help you in a sustainable way? And don't we all want, we know that people who are employed, who have careers, not just jobs, there's less crime. Kids, don't we, as parents, don't we all want our children to fulfill their full potential? And so providing career pathways and encouraging education and summer jobs. And that's why these public-private partnerships can be so much more than what they are today.
So Kieth, you've talked about the hard stuff. And so let me push you a little bit here. And Charles Thomas and Sharon Watson both have posed questions that ask how a corporation like Bank of America might go beyond its sort of philanthropic and even service orientation to its strength as a corporate leader to move policy, advocate for federal, state policy changes, and so forth that would address this issue of racial disparities in wealth. How is Bank of America in that capacity? Is that a role it plays in moving the needle on this issue?
Of course, there's a role for us to play there in public policy as well, at the local, state, as well as the federal level. But we all recognize the challenge that we have in front of us at the federal level at this point in time. And so what we've tried to do is not complain about it, try to be as influential as we possibly can, but be as influential and control as much as we can control. And the one thing that we can control is how we treat people. And we felt an obligation that despite all the things that we may have done in the past, we felt that we could do more. And one way that we're doing more is not just giving money, but leveraging our human capital. And so I'm proud of the fact that I can point to several of my teammates here in the Charlotte area that are actually leaders on loan in CMS, at CPCC, within our nonprofit space, because they have skills. And we look forward to our historically Black colleges and universities. Again, these areas that perhaps they haven't received the federal dollars to support, investments in the future, but we can provide human capital that have years of expertise and experience that can perhaps work on a 1-year, 2-year assignment and move leap years in terms of their experience to implement new systems, new technologies, and digitize nonprofits and schools, and help businesses in a dramatic way. And we're doing that. Derek mentioned as an example, the Tulsa Massacre. Well, we gave $1 million to Greenwood Rising. And again, I would say it this way. I'm proud of the fact that we gave $1 million to Greenwood Rising, but that was the easy part. The much more difficult part is, how do we bring back that Black Wall Street there? I don't think there's anyone that has more Black financial advisors than Bank of America Merrill Lynch. And now, one thing that technology and this pandemic has taught us, that we can be really productive in a virtual environment like today. And so I don't have to have people on the ground in Tulsa to provide education about wealth management and investing. I can do that remotely with all of them. And that's what we're leaning in on, is bringing more of our volunteer human capital to supplement the financial philanthropic work that we're doing and really trying to have a substantive difference in people's lives.
Yeah, thank you. Angelique, Lauren Woodruff asks what are some specific examples of state and local policies that can impact wealth, and perhaps federal policy too. And we can also ask that of Derek, but I wonder if you can speak to specific policies, especially given the budget constraints of local government.
Sure. So some specific strategies highlighted in the Racial Wealth Gap report include minority business capitalization and support, which we touched on in our discussion already, universal basic income, as Derek also mentioned, a guarantee of a minimum regular income per individual, federal or state job guarantee proposals provide universal job coverage to individuals that are seeking employment, and a minimum wage would be over the poverty level. Universal retirement accounts was also highlighted, which would be a federally regulated retirement plan that provides a savings infrastructure for all workers. And then baby bonds was also highlighted, but I'll let Derek take that.
So Derek, that's a kick over to you. So yeah, tell us about that policy, but I also want to just insert, something Kieth said, which was that in terms of advocacy and lobbying at the federal level, that this is difficult at the federal level in terms of policy right now, and that the game is, very local. I don't know if you would push back on that. Are there opportunities for federal policy in the current climate, and including baby bonds?
I want to lead with, this is my first time engaging with Kieth, and just admiration, because clearly him and his passion and commitment to doing this is clear. And I applaud again, Bank of America, that he's in this leadership position, because frankly, that might not have occurred 10 years ago, to my knowledge. So that's indicative of progress, and also related to the answer of your question. So let's put all this in context. This is about, my friend Dorian Warren pointed out that this is the 25th anniversary year of welfare reform. That was, in my view, a direction of understanding poverty that was not most useful for a just and moral society, where we started to impose penalties and blame the poor for their conditions, to make them jump through hurdles in order to get something as basic as income for their livelihood. But yet today, we're having conversations around a child tax credit, where the government is using its most powerful fiscal tool to directly send income to people based solely on the number of children they have, just as a right to citizenship, a recognition that it is difficult to raise a child, and we have this fiscal tool, and this is where we want to direct public resources. That's changed. So we see what's going on with right now, the struggle to raise the debt ceiling, and lack of unity in Congress. But we're also in a climate of innovative ideas and a new political regime, that a potential for a new political regime that's very dramatic, where President Biden, his first executive order was to order that every aspect of government take race equity into consideration. That's radical. That is something that our government has not done in an explicit way since my knowledge. So we have potential to do these things at the federal level. So I encourage us to keep building this movement, keep having partnerships where we develop this muscle and demonstrate what we can actually do. The last thing I'll say is, I'm all in favor of guaranteed income as a right to income. I'm all in favor of economic rights, a right to healthcare, a right to capital, which is what baby bonds is, ensuring that regardless of your race, your gender, as a simple birthright, it's a recognition that the ways in which wealth is generated is it takes capital to get more capital, and that, financial coaching, all that is important and useful. But at the end of the day, if you have no finances to manage in the first place, you can't really get wealth. So income fits within that frame of an enabling good and service that without it, you are strictly at the whim of either being exploited or charity. So ensuring that everybody has income is important. I don't like UBI. I'd like guaranteed income, but not universal basic income for some technical reasons. If you literally gave everybody in the society the same amount of income, you're actually subsidizing wealth for those at the top. By definition, if you're poor, you engage in consumption, you're a subsistence population. If you're wealthy, then your consumption needs are met and additional resources can go towards asset promotion. And also, it is almost the definition of inflation to literally give everybody the same income. So I would encourage us to use the name of guaranteed income rather than universal basic income.
Do you see, a number of folks have asked questions about those kinds of federal remedies, like you mentioned income, loan forgiveness, some kind of reparation, some kind of so federal guarantee, as you said. Are there any of these that show more promise or potential execution than others? I appreciate the distinction you just made in those in the strategies that you mentioned.
The political moment, being a political zeitgeist of predicting which one holds most order, probably not my particular expertise, but I can tell you that pessimism will keep us from achieving them. I can tell you that we're at a point where we're literally having conversations about the president canceling student loan debt, and there's some initiative taking place. Baby bonds. These are ideas that, frankly, aren't even foreign to America. We have done Social Security. We've done these big programs in the past. The problem is that we've done them in a way that was, by design and implementation, exclusive rather than inclusive. So the lessons from the past is to make sure that when we design and implement them, we are intentionally including those that have been excluded in the past and those that need it the most, that their race, gender, et cetera, doesn't leave them for it. A couple other points really quick, that there is no silver bullet American policy. So this is why we need an economic rights framework. We invest a lot in political and civil rights, but whether you lean capitalist, socialist is almost irrelevant if we don't have individuals engaging in transactions with proper resources. They have no bargaining power or leverage. So I'm advocating for economic rights, which are not the right to go to a disco, but the right that when something is essential and enabling, that we as a society make sure that people have it, like the right to health, like the right to an education. And again, this is not foreign from us. The United Nations Declaration of Human Rights that came out of World War II, we firmly talked about civil, political, and economic rights. Over time, our society has forgotten the economic rights part and become so occupied with property rights, not people rights, property rights, without recognition that the existing distribution of resources is grounded in immorality. So codifying the property rights that we have today without redressing that past is only going to lead to further pathways that don't really redress the society that would be grounded in morality.
No, thank you. Thank you. Kieth, I wanted to come back to you because I know you address the issues of business support and even ways of reaching into different communities, but Aaron Sanders notes that, one of the things we found during the pandemic was that some of those relief efforts, grants, loans, PPP efforts to really support businesses didn't necessarily make their way to communities of colors for a host of reasons. There was also a question here around specific hindrances to immigrant communities where there might be language barriers and other kinds of things. And I wonder, and I know you've talked about addressing those through ambassadors and others in the community, but were there some lessons learned fundamentally about these, about programs related to business that can be improved in order to have more effectiveness around reaching these small businesses?
Yes, it's a great question. Let me first say, Derek, thank you. It's a pleasure to be on this panel with you, and the wealth of information that you're sharing is outstanding. Byron, to answer the question, I'd start by saying that one of the reasons I am such a proponent of public-private coalitions is because the PPP program was just one of the latest examples of, despite its best intention of trying to provide funds to small businesses, you can see that a governmental program of that size and magnitude, without a lot of involvement with the financial community and ultimately the people who are trying to serve and assist, is just laced with problems. So for some, there's always going to be some small element of the population that is going to try to take advantage of any governmental program. What I find distasteful is that, those who are, opposed to what they would consider big government will always point to those extreme examples. And of course, any governmental program with large dollars, we have to try our best to protect and ensure that the dollars get to the places where they're intended. I dispute or challenge, the first three rounds of the PPP program, there was no indication in the application process to indicate that you were a minority business owner. And so when the reports first came out that said, oh, I don't think the funds are getting to small businesses, a lot of that was anecdotal because we had small business owners, minority small business owners saying that, hey, what about me? I'm not trying to deny that, but the facts are that the program, when it was first launched in the first several rounds, there was no place to indicate that you were a small business owner, minority ownership, or what gender you were. We got smarter as time moved on. The most important thing I think that we can take away from programs like the PPP program is that look at what it did do, right? There's absolutely no question. It saved businesses, especially at the beginning, where none of us anticipated that when we left our offices or shut down our businesses in March, that here we would, as I sit in my office today, I can still walk outside my office and still see businesses that have not opened up yet. And so the best thing that I can do, that I can control, is to try to ensure that it's a safe environment for me to bring my teammates back. I have 16,000 here in Charlotte. And we've made the decision that, hey, we want you to be fully vaccinated and you have to tell us. So you're confirmed vaccinated and we're inviting teammates back. And if I can get more teammates here in Center City of Charlotte, then I can have continuing dialogue about the Caribou Coffee that still isn't open yet to say that, hey, I think I got enough employees. I can do programs with my nonprofits who have been decimated by this period to say, okay, not only can I'm going to give you some grant funding, but you need people to come through your doors. You need people to participate in your programs. And so let's do some things that are free for my employees on Wednesday in a safe, healthy environment. And so those are some of the things that we're trying to do to whatever this new normal is going to be coming out of this pandemic, that we can get this economy going again. We all know that we want it to be revved up and clicking on all cylinders. But instead of just being disappointed by the jobs report, again, I'm trying to exhibit leadership here at Bank of America by saying that, look, pay a healthy wage. We can pay a healthy wage and get people to come and join us. We need great people to be at Bank of America. And you're going to make $21 an hour, just starting out, on addition to healthcare benefits and vacation and things that, my parents never had the opportunity to enjoy. And so we all can play a role here by ensuring that we don't tolerate what we would tolerate in the past. We have a voice now. And yes, that arc of change may take a while at the federal level, but none of us should be discouraged by speaking our voice and playing whatever role we potentially can play locally as well as nationally to recognize that the things that have occurred in the past, we're not going to tolerate any longer. We don't provide funding to private prisons. But so therefore we can reinvest those dollars to healthy communities and neighborhoods and this thing that we call the crescent here, because we're just not going to continue to just fund private prisons anymore. Can we do something to eliminate the crime and influence positivity versus criminal and just locking people up?
I appreciate, definitely the interconnectedness on the ground and how these different actions push other actions to generate the bigger impact, economic impact in the community. Angelique, I wonder if you have some insights from the minority-owned business research that you were a part of regarding some of these connections on the ground to businesses that Kieth was talking about.
Yeah, definitely. So to speak to Aaron's comment or question, so what we saw as a barrier to minority-owned small businesses was capacity. Due to the lack of startup capital and capital in general, they didn't have the ability to hire experts that were focused on accounting, that were focused on the legal aspect of their businesses, that were focused on marketing. So one of the support that we highlighted in the report was just technical assistance or coaching, going back to that coaching, focused on business planning, marketing, operations, management, that technology piece, the legal literacy piece, and accounting that will allow them when these, applications for relief grants and other things that come through to really have their own capacity and be able to self-advocate for the things that they need. And then to speak to the, those language barriers, we also found that to address those language barriers, we would need to embed and advertise Spanish-speaking service providers into that natural local business network, or create subsidized parallel service organizations which conduct business in Spanish, so that there can be a level of equity as it relates to service provision.
Derek, one thing I wanted to ask you, thank you, Angelique, for that. You've talked about, as you were talking and have interjected into the conversation, these historic examples of government sanctioning and even dismantling Black wealth. In many ways, they seem almost unconscionable today. But I wonder if, as you look ahead, even as you promote government intervention in this issue, are there any government-imposed threats on the horizon that could be a setback for what we're talking about? Is there any anything that concerns you regarding this effort from a government vantage point?
So a little while ago, I gave a narrative of optimism that society's on the precipice of change. One could also give a narrative of pessimism, because the direction of that change can go is still to be determined. I mean, I can literally say we had a near takeover of the federal government January 6th with vivid signs of a horrific racist past outside in some of the images. I feel confident in saying that the image of a noose on our Capitol not too long ago is certainly sobering and letting us know that there are ways in which we can go that could lead to a far more unjust society grounded in immorality. So that's just the broad view. I guess to answer the question more specifically, I think we got to be careful not to have this moment co-opted, that there is sadly, the result is sad of some horrific incidences Breonna Taylor, George Floyd, et cetera, which aren't new to our history, but perhaps with technology today, we're documented in a way that are more vivid than in the past. So we have to be careful that this moment is not co-opted in a way that manipulates and uses the moment to distract us from doing what we need to do that's systemic long-term or shift it in a way. Sorry, that wasn't specific, but I think that we got to be steadfast and committed to the vision and justice, and realize that regardless of moment, that's where we got to be values placed.
Well, I appreciate you shifting that to a positive note as we end the conversation here. I wonder, Kieth, if you'd like a final word just on where you see our community heading in this regard.
Well, I share with Derek, and I know Angelique well, the optimistic view, but the reality is that unless we understand our past, then we do run the risk of repeating or being satisfied with our current state and unfortunate future. And so we're proud of our partnership with UNC Charlotte, and we thank you for the research that you provide and the guidance specifically to this particular issue of wealth creation. And despite my optimism as well, there's much work that still needs to be done. And that's the message that I guess I'd like to leave with all of us, is that no longer should we tolerate pre-2020. And as a community, we're more educated, more knowledgeable, and hopefully more convicted than ever before to create positive change. We have Black, African Americans in key senior leadership roles, not only running our city, but throughout the business community here. We can solve some of these problems. We can make a commitment to providing a job to a young person in high school to ensure that they get exposed to something different and not just idle time. We can make a commitment as parents that we want everyone, regardless of who they are, to fulfill their full potential and be a contributing member of society. What happened to the American dream? That we know that people who own their own homes care for that home more than just renters or temporary dwellers, that the neighborhood is nicer. When did it become okay for us to just, in today's environment, accept that, oh no, I can live here and what's going on over the west side of Charlotte is not my problem? What better than that? And that's what I'm excited about. We have city leadership now, informed by education, and a growing commitment in the business community that we can return profits to shareholders, but we can do more than that. And hopefully, and I'm proud of the fact that I work for a company and work for an executive that believes that we can do both. And in fact, we must do both.
Thank you for that. We appreciate your leadership, but thank you for that charge to the community. And thank all three of our panelists for their participation and sharing their knowledge. Mr. Kieth Cockrell, Dr. Derek Hamilton, Ms. Angelique Gaines, thank you all for joining us in this conversation. I just want to invite our listeners to tune in to the next conversation on workforce, which is October 28th. And then there is the Schul Forum event on November 18th that Dr. Lori Thomas mentioned. Thank you again, everyone, for your time. We really appreciate your great questions, and we look forward to continuing the conversation and this great work in our community.
Thank you.
Thank you.